International Human Resource Management. For today's lecture, we continue on topic 6, that is about international compensations. Learning objective for chapter 8. At the end of this lecture, students should be able to examine the complexities when a firm moves from compensations at domestic level to compensation in an international context. Detail key components of an international compensation programs. Outline two main approaches to international compensations, which are going rate and balance sheet, and advantages and disadvantages of each approach. Introduce the imagined approach to international compensations that we call as local plus. Introductions of this chapter, we start with compensations. Global compensation practice have recently moved far beyond the original domain of expatriate pay. Compensations is increasingly seen as a mechanism to develop and reinforce a global corporate culture. A primary resource of corporate culture, explicitly linking performance outcome with associated costs, and the nexus of increasing stringent, sophisticated, and a public disclosure on the central issues of corporate governance in an international context. Moving to complexity of international compensations. International compensation increase complexity. Domestic pay practice challenge the national and corporate value and pay systems. Greater choice, the growing ability to systematically identify and implement novel or unrecognized pay practice. Increased complexity in global pay include a growing use of outsourced activities and subsequent labor pricing needs. Balancing centralization and decentralization of incentive, benefit, and pensions give the technical capabilities of web-based human resource information system, or we call HRIS, and balancing the needs of more accurate and detailed performance metrics on international assignee with the realities of cost-sensitive environments resulting from maturing global competitiveness. Moving to increasing challenge, international compensation increasingly domestic pay practice of long-standing have been questioned as a firm move into global area. This overt challenge deeply held national and corporate value. Pay system include challenge to the universal applicability of incentive pay programs and what some critics view out of control executive compensation programs often driven by US-based multinational pay system. Critics of US-based multinational pay for executive have recently expanded to include challenge to the effectiveness of legal and institutional form of corporate governance and the role of responsibility and pay practice of corporate boards and compensation committees and the use of executive pay consultants. We're still in introduction sessions. Now we move about increased choice. For increased choice, there is a great choice in international compensations. There are growing ability to systematically identify and implement theretofore novel or unrecognized pay practice may be seen to result to increase in the transparency of pay practice around the world due to increased global media attentions and reach, change in corporate reporting regulations, and sheer number of assignments across border, as well as the impact of World Wide Web. Okay, it's remains to be seen if increased choice will translate into predictable set of the global pay practice, complexity, challenge, and choice facing managers involved in global compensation decisions do not change two primary areas of focus. These individuals must manage highly complex and turbulent local detail while concurrently building and maintaining a unified strategic pattern of compensation policy, practice, and value. For multinational enterprise to successfully manage compensations and benefit required knowledge of employment and taxation law, custom, environments, and employment practice of many foreign countries. Familiarity Familiarity with currency fluctuations and the effect of inflation on the compensations, and understanding why and when special allowance must be supplied, and which allowance are necessary in what country, all within the context of shifting political, economic, and social conditions. Moving to objective of international compensation, that is from a firm's perspective. When developing international compensation policies, a multinational enterprise seeks to satisfying several objectives. First, the policy should be consistent with the overall strategy, structure, and business needs of multinational. Second, the policy must work to attract and retain staff in the area where the multinational has the greatest needs and opportunities. Thus, the policy must be competitive and recognize factors such as incentive for foreign service, tax equalizations, and reimbursement for reasonable costs. Third, the policy should facilitate the transfer of international employees in the most cost-effective manner for the firms. Fourth, the policy must give due considerations to pay, to equity, and ease of the administrations. We continue on objective of international compensations. Now we look at the employee's perspective. From employee perspective. So what is objective of international compensation from employee perspective? The international employee will also have a number of objectives that needs to be achieved from the firm's compensation policy. First, the employee will expect the policy to offer financial protections in terms of benefit, social security, and living costs in the foreign locations. Second, the employee will expect foreign assignments to offer opportunity for financial advancement through income and or saving. Third, the employee will expect issues such as the cost of housing, education of children, and home leave to be addressed in the policy. Moving to key components of international compensation programs for expatriates. Base salary. So the area of international compensations. International compensation is complex primarily because of multinational must cater to three categories of employees, which are parent country nations, third country nations, and host country nations. So base salary, the term base salary acquires acquired some different meaning when employee go abroad. Okay. In domestic context, base salary denotes the amount of cash compensation serving as benchmark for another compensation elements such as bonus and benefits. Allowance issues concerning allowance can be very challenging to a firm's establishing in overall compensation policy, partly because of various forms of allowance that exist. In this section, we will discuss 6 most common allowance, which are financial service inducement and hardship premiums, including cost of living, housing allowance, safety allowance, transportation allowance, education of children's allowance, and length of stay. Okay, for expatriate, this is a primary component of a package of allowance, many of which are direct related to base salary. For example, foreign service premiums, cost of allowance, cost of living allowance, housing allowance, as well as the basis of in-service benefits and pension contributions. It may pay in home or local country currency or a combination of both. The base salary is the foundation's block for international compensations, whether the employee in parent country nations or third country nations. Major difference can occur in employees' package depending whether base salary is linked to home country or parent country nations or third country nations, or whether in international rate is paid. Moving to 3 approach to international compensations. First, we have going rate approach. Second, balance sheet approach. And last is combination between going rate approach and balance sheet approach, we call as local plus. Okay, we start the compensation approach with the going rate approach. The key characteristic of this approach can be summarized as follows. Based on the local market rates, going rate approach relies on survey comparisons among local, national, or host country nations, expatriate of same nationality, and then expatriate of all nationalities, compensation based on selected survey comparison. Base pay and benefit may be supplemented by additional payment for low-pay countries. Okay, for example, a Japanese bank operating in New York would need to decide whether its reference point would be local US salaries. Other Japanese competitors in New York are all foreign banks operating in New York. With the going rate approach, if the location is low-pay country, the multinational usually supplements base pay with additional benefits and payments. Moving on advantage and disadvantage of going rate approach. Okay, here we have some of advantages of going rate approach. Advantage of going rate approach are equality with a local national, simplicity, identification with host country, and equity among different nationality. However, instead of providing advantage, going rate approach also have some disadvantages. Some of these advantages of going rate here are variations between assignments for some employee, variations between expatriate of some nationality in different country, and potential re-entry problems. Moving on, balance sheet approach. The objective is to keep expatriate whole through maintenance of home country living standards. This approach links the base salary for expatriate to salary structure of the relevant home country. A key characteristic of balance sheet approach are basic objective is to maintenance of home country living standard plus financial inducements. And home country pay and benefits are foundations of this approach. Adjustments to home package to balance additional expenditure in host country. Financial incentive, expatriate hardship premium added to make the package more attractive. And most common system is usage by multinational firms. We continue on balance sheet approach. There are four major categories of outlay incurred by expatriate in balance sheet approach. First, good and service. Good and service include food, personal care, clothing, household furnishing, recreations, transportations, and medical care. Second, housing. Housing involves the major costs associated with the housing in the host country. Third, income tax. Okay, income tax and the parent country and host country income tax. And the fourth is about reserve. Reserve contribution to saving or payments for benefits, pensions contributions, investments, education expenses, social security tax. Advantage and disadvantage of balance sheet approach. There are three main advantages and two disadvantages of balance sheet approach. For disadvantages, we start with the equity. Balance sheet approach provides equity between assignments and equity between expatriates of the same nationality and facilitate expatriate re-entry. Easy to communicate to employee. However, disadvantage balance sheet approach are balance sheet approach can result in a great disparities between expatriates of different nationality, can result in a great disparity between expatriate and local national, and also can be quite complex to administer. For example, Singapore regional headquarters of U.S. Bank, a U.S. parent country nations, and a New Zealand as a third country nations may perform the same or similar banking duties, but Americans will receive a higher salary than New Zealander because of the difference in US and New Zealand base salary. Okay, here this is example of expatriate compensation worksheets. Okay, here the employee is Brian Smith from Australia, has been assigned to a new locations which is known as New Eurasia. New Eurasia as a marketing manager starting from 1st February 2008. In this example, Australia expatriate is assigned to a hypothetical country called a New Eurasia, which has a cost of living index of 150 relative to Australia and exchange rate of 1.5 relative to Australia dollar. In addition to foreign service premium, hardship allowance is also payable for these locations. Housing is provided by multinational enterprise, and notional cost for this is recognized by 7% deduction from the package, along with National tax deductions. We discuss taxations later on in another chapter. Moving on, local plus approach. Okay, for local plus approach, expatriates are paid according to current salary levels, structure and administration guideline of host country, plus provide benefits such as transportations, housing, dependents, educations in recognitions of employees' foreign status. Benefits may be paid in a kind or adds on the local salary level at the gross up rate to account for host tax. Local plus compensations, familiarizations visits, home leave, cross-cultural training, departure program, or support assistance. Local plus approach continue. The driving force behind the local plus for multinational enterprise is to reduce their international assignment costs. Many expatriates are willing to accept such package in return for international experience that will enhance their future career. Typically, Local Plus is used for long-term assignments, permanent transfer, intra-regional transfer, example in Asia Pacific, and for assignments from low to high wage locations. Local plus compensations is a hybrid version of both balance sheet and going rate approach. It's containing the optimum benefit of both balance sheet approach and going rate approach. Local plus help to solve some problem in traditional compensation approach and therefore has some benefits. We continue on local plus approach. Such a hybrid version is advantageous for a number of reasons. First, expatriates can identify a home country through a balance sheet approach, but more expatriates undertaking multiple assignments, often back to back and over a decade, thus identifying home is difficult. Using a balance sheet approach under these circumstances does not make sense, but local plus approach does. Local plus approach continue. Second, companies that recruit employees from locations where they have no presence, example, third country nations, and thus no payroll facilities would find it difficult to administer either a home or host-based approach. A local plus approach will offer plus benefits based on what is suitable given the employee's experience and skill rather than where they come from or where they are going to. Still on locals plus approach, we continue on. Third, local plus approach is adopted widely in Asian Pacific regions. Companies that are headquarters in Asia are more likely to have a formal local plus policy in a place and more assignees on a local plus policy than in other regions in the world. This can be due in large part of Asian economic growth, which is influencing the demand for more globalized workforce. In these situations, multinational enterprises must entice numerous expatriates to the region while facilitating the transfer of international employees in the most cost-effective manners. We continue on local plus approach. Although there are many benefits of local plus compensations, there are also some disadvantages from firms that use the approach. Okay, expatriate lifestyle is more closely allied with the lifestyle and socio-economic habits of host country nations. The disparity in purchasing power between expatriate and host country nations is marginal given that the choice they made about their standard of living are determined less by multinational enterprise. Local plus compensations tend to decrease the tie that bind expatriates to their firms. Local plus approach continue. There is an increased risk of losing expatriate to competitor, particularly during an international assignment, which can have a devastating effect on multinational enterprise border global staffing objective. Moving to compensations, approaches, and strategies for long-term international assignments. First strategy, first approach, we have policy name that we call as a full international policy, and this policy mainly want to develop. So we check description of this policy and purpose use of this policy. This description first. Okay, description for full international compensation approach based on balance sheet or home approach, full bell and whistle example, generous remunerations, this including bonus and incentive, and benefits including bonus and benefits including cost of living allowance, housing, education, support allowance, car, homes, leave, and club memberships. Full international, designed to ensure employee lifestyle, not disadvantage as a result of international relocations. So they don't face any disadvantage or difficulty during their international assignments. So the purpose of this policy, compensation policy are targeted at executive for career developments or on international track who possess universal skill and consider high potentials. Often used for Cardell approach to develop career of elite group of higher performers whose permanent mobility in long-term strategic goal. Mainly used for retention purpose, where goal is to repatriate to corporate headquarters or business group headquarters, and used separately, sparingly, and as reward for key individual. Compensation approach and strategy for long-term international assignments continue on Expat Light, and this policy is our strategy is for skill and secondments. So we take a look on description of this policy and the purpose of this policy. First, we start with the description of this policy. Expat Light is actually based on reduction balance sheet, home approach, reduced version of full bell and whistle. Example, generous remuneration with or without bonus and incentive, and inclusion of some benefits. Example, housing, education, car, home leave, but not others. Example, club membership, spouse allowance, cost of living. And the purpose used for this policy, expat-like policy, is for expatriate with a deep technical skill or competencies needed in another locations. Specific goal is to transfer skills and knowledge for duration of assignments only, not more than 2 years. Expatriate relocations for fixed periods and repatriate with no intention to relocate again unless a specific skill needs arise, and often used to service clients in locations where location skills not available. Okay, we continue on compensation approach and strategies for long-term international assignments. We continue on local plus policy, and this policy is actually for cost saving. So we want to know the description of this policy and the purpose of this policy. We start with the description of this policy. This policy is actually based on going rate host approach. This policy, local plus policy, provides some benefits of developmental policy, but greatly reduce basic expatriate, often localized with some additional benefits, provide to sustain retentions. No ongoing allowance, example, cost of living, initial allowance typically phases out over period of assignments. Okay, for example, 100% benefits year 1, 50% benefits on year 2, and only 20% benefits for year 3. And the purpose for local plus are combinations of developmental and skill secondments expatriate, but generally target at middle management executive who are specialized functional people or board business manager, and or generalists who move between varieties of different positions and locations throughout their career, and typically offer to manager initiating relocations or indicating willingness to relocate. Compensation approach and strategies for long-term international assignments continue on localization policy, and this policy strategy are to cost saving, functional turnover, and retentions. So description for this policy and purpose, as I present this slide. We start with the description of the policy. So what is localizations? Localization is actually based on ongoing rate or host approach. Initial allowance from any of above strategy pays out over period of assignments. They start with 100% benefits year 1 and reduce a little bit to 50% benefits year 2, and reduce again and at the year 3 to 20% benefits on year 3 to achieve full local remunerations. Purpose of the localizations is to typically offer to manager initiating a relocations or indicating willingness to relocate, and long-term assignee who have exceed term of contract. Example, beyond initial beyond initial 3 or 5 years assignments, but who wish to remain in location of firm does not wish to repatriate. Compensation approach and strategies for long-term international assignments continue on one-way international. And strategy for one-way international is for self-initiative transfer. So we look at the description of this policy. This policy based on ongoing rate or host approach. one-way relocation package to host destinations, one-way international, concern on salary, incentive, and benefits paid from local parent. And the purpose used for this policy is for self-initiative, employee initiative relocations. Moving on, multinational enterprise approach to international taxations. Multinational generally select one of the following approach to handling international taxations. Okay, tax equalizations. Firm withhold an amount equal to home country taxations obligations of the expatriate and pay all tax in host country. However, tax protections, the employee pay up the amount of tax his or her will pay on the compensations in the home country. In such situations, the employee is entitled to any windfall received if the total tax are less in the foreign country than in the home country. In her classic view of the global compensations, there are two other approaches under tax protections we call as ad hoc and laissez-faire. Ad hoc refer to each expatriate handle differently depending upon the individual package. A package they agree with multinational enterprise, and laissez-faire employees are on their own in conforming to host country and home country taxation law and practice. However, neither of these approaches are recommended, and Shell will focus on equalizations and tax protections as these are the most common approach. Tax equalizations is far the more common taxation policy used by multinational. Thus, for an expatriate, tax payments equal to liability of the home country tax payable with the same income and family status are imposed on the employee's salary and bonus. Any additional premiums and or allowance are paid by firms. Tax fee to the employee as multinationals operate in more and more countries, they are subject to widely discrepant income tax rates. This slide shows maximum marginal federation tax according to country. As multinationals operate in more and more countries, they are subject to widely discrepant income tax rates. For example, if we look at the selected maximum federal marginal tax rates, this slide shows top 5 highest taxation countries are Australia, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Denmark, and France. This information based on adapted from Original Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD). Okay. Moving to tentative conclusions, patterns in complexity, challenge, and choice. So far, some of these chapters have concentrated on expatriate compensations. We will now draw conclusion for large group of international managers in multinational enterprise. Recent developments in the study of global pay system or global pay issue may be seen to operate at three distinct vertical levels. The basics level of culture value and assumptions from the below. The intermediate level of pay strategy in the middle. Practice and the system design and the surface artifact level pay administrations and form. Okay, you can see from this slide artifact on the top, and on the second horizontal level, firms must individually determine how to strike balance between traditional, international based model and explanation of pay and those more international focused model and explanations pay of what they comprise a global challenge to the status quo. Globalizing firms must individually choose between international or externally focused assumptions, strategies, and practice. This combination choice is the complex context of pay for any given multinational. Pay context is the pivotal center in the column and figure in this slide. Okay, okay, here is the additional reading material that you can go through after class. For supporting expatriate to turbulent times, the expatriate life is struggling to survive for COVID-19 and expatriate living in Dubai is bad news for the economics. This maybe can help you to add additional information and knowledge about international comparisons. That's all for topic number 8. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.